And welcome to the Skill Building Block of the Month quilt program. Today we're going to go over our Friendship Star, which is our first traditional pieced block that we're going to be learning. So today I'm going to take this block and I'm going to be teaching you the basics about piecing. So if you don't know much about piecing, or if you're pretty new quilting, this is a great place for you. If you're experienced and just want to know how the block works, feel free to hang out. We're going to build the block together, and I'm just going to take a little bit of extra time to talk about matching seams and nesting seams, about how to trim Haskell triangles, how to trim rows, and how to trim your block. So here are the colors that I've chosen. I've got white for the background, so I'm going to go ahead and use the swirly kind of version. I'm going to do white in the background, lime green in the middle, and then turquoise and purple for the half square triangles here. So the first thing we got to do after we cut our squares, so the regular squares are going to be 4.5 inches, and the half square triangles are going to be 5 inches. So we take our half square triangles, we put our squares for half square triangles, we put them right sides together, and because mine are solid Kona, they don't have a right side. And we're going to draw a line from corner to corner diagonally. I'll grab my marker and my ruler. I'm going to draw a line corner to corner, and then draw a line from corner to corner. Now, you might notice that this one is a little bit off, so I'm just going to go ahead and flip it and use this corner to corner because that's going to be straighter. And I'm not going to worry too much about that little jagged edge because that's going to disappear into the seam, or it might even be trimmed off. So when we do half square triangles and they're a ½ inch bigger, what I like to suggest is sewing a scant 1/4 inch on either side of the line. So instead of a regular 1/4 inch on both sides, I would do a scant 1/4 inch. And the difference is it's just a slightly bit closer to the line, and it's just like a hair length closer to the line. And that's to make room for the fold. When we unfold it to make the half square triangle, we need to have a little bit of extra room for the fold, for the fabric that gets lost in the fold. So 1/4 inch, another way to put scant 1/4 inch is if you use your edge of your pressure foot for your guide, then you would sew next to it. So right next to where you would normally put your 1/4 inch. It's basically taking off about a 1/16 of an inch. It's very, very small. But I do suggest doing that on both sides. That way you can get the full length when you unfold it. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch on both sides. Okay, so here we have our half square triangles ready to cut. And you're just going to go ahead and slice on that line that you drew from corner to corner. And I used an air-soluble, water-soluble pen. And I always say test your pens before you use them, just in case. So even when you buy brand new, they can still not work quite as well. So I'm just trimming them apart, corner to corner. Okay. There. And then we're going to press them open. Now when I press my half square triangles, I tend to press to the dark side. I don't tend to press them open. So I'm going to be pressing towards the turquoise on these. Now when you do sew half square triangles, you are sewing on the bias, so they are a little extra stretchy. So when you're pressing, make sure that you are not pushing very hard or not pulling very hard, or your squares will come out wonky. So I wanted to show you the way I press. It might come in handy if you're losing fabric in the fold, or too much fabric in the fold. And I pull just slightly, just enough to pull it down, and I use the edge of my iron in the center, and I push out. So I do a slight push, but because it's already sewn right here, it's not going to stretch the fabric. I'm mostly just using the very tip of the iron, and then I push down to press. And that's usually a very good way of getting the fabric out of the fold. Yep. again with this one, and I use water. I always use water when I press. Sometimes I'll use starch if the pieces are being stubborn. Normally I just use water and everything comes out great. There we go. The next step is to trim our half square triangles. So I like to use this ruler here. I like all the hash marks. It's very forgiving. If I'm in a rush and it goes a little wonky, I can really use all these marks to help line up my half square triangle. So I always use the 45-degree angle here. I line it up first on the seam, and then I line up the edges as close as I can to 4.5 inches. So sometimes it's a little wonky, and that's okay. So we're going to trim it to make it straight. Trim. And you're just trimming just a little bit, because when we sew, our fabric gets pushed just slightly by the machine. So that's what we're going to be trimming off, just to straighten it. So you don't want too much extra. I'm laying it up here because it will add up by the end of the row or the end of the quilt. A 1/16 of an inch can add up to 1/2 inch or an inch, and everything will be off. So we want to make sure we do trim these. So I line up here, and then again on the side and the bottom, and it should be nice and straight for the second cut when you're lining it up on the inside of the ruler. And see, it's just a little bit. Now they do have a really cool ruler out there. I've used it once. I wasn't as big a fan as a lot of others, but it could be useful for you. It's called a half square triangle trimmer. And what it does is it trims your half square triangles while it's still in a triangle, which could come in handy. So I would go ahead and check those out and try them out and see which ones you like the best. But it's just a slight trim. In some cases, it might be so straight that you don't need to trim anything off, which is great. So we have two ready to go. Now that all our blocks are ready, we're going to go ahead and lay out our block. So we have a background, half square triangle. I'm going to use the turquoise as my darker color from the pattern. And another white. And I have a textured white, so I got to make sure my little bubbles or circles are up on the right side facing up. Green in the center, bubble, oh that's upside down, bubble, bubble. And then place our half square triangles where we have turquoise, turquoise, and turquoise. And there we have it. Now, I have in the pattern to sew them together into rows. If you prefer columns, that's fine. What I'm about to show you how to nest seams and to square the rows and the blocks will work either way. So I'm going to sew mine into rows. I'm going to sew 1, 2, 3, and then I'll show you how I nest the seams. So we have our 3 rows sewed together, and I'm going to show you how pressing can help you nest your seams. So we got to plan a little bit ahead for pressing. I'm about to do this upside down, I think. And it's okay. All right. So we're going to go ahead and flip this over. I haven't pressed my seams yet. I just sewed the rows together. I'm going to press my seams in opposite direction. So I'm going to press this top ones to the right, to the left, and then to the right down here. And that's going to allow me to easily, or more easily, nest my seams. So I'm going to spray them with water. Grab mine. Now, if I wasn't planning ahead to nest these, you can also press these so if a shadow bothers you on the front of your quilt. So I did make a note of that in the pattern. If you're more concerned, if you're using white like I am, and more concerned about a shadow showing on the front, see it's showing just a tad, you can also press this open, and that'll help that shadow not be as dark. But if you're not concerned, I do suggest pressing it this way, where you have seams that are alternating, because it's going to make nesting them much better. It's going to make your corners meet a lot easier. I'm pressing in opposite directions. And then last one. sticking it. So when you're lining up your rows, I always suggest lining them up by the seams, not the ends of your block. So to nest, we're going to line up our seams, and let me go ahead and zoom in a little bit. We're going to be looking at where the seams meet. And I call it, they meet at like a shelf, that's what I call it. And right here you can see the shelf between the purple and the turquoise, how it meets very nicely in there in envelopes, and it's called nesting. So there is a nested seam. And then on the next side, you can see it's nesting between the green and the white. It meets right there on the fold. That's a nest. So we're nesting the seams. That's going to help your corners meet beautifully. So you can pin it here, or you can go ahead and walk it on over to your machine and sew it together. So I'm going to go ahead and sew my 2 rows together, these together, and then this one to here. And then we'll take a look at the front. So before I continue, I'd like to show you how I square a row. So I do this on a large quilt and on smaller quilts and on blocks. And in some cases you may not need to square a row. In this case I can see it's slightly off, so I'm going to go ahead and square it. So what I do is I line up a long ruler, from corner to corner, here to here. And I use my seams inside to line up my ruler to see if my row is straight. So I'm lining up, I'm just choosing a random line here. It's 7, and I'm lining up 11 just to see those are straight. That's good. And then I check the edges to see if they're relatively straight. I can see my block was pushed in one direction, so I know that it's going to be slightly off, and that's okay because I can trim that at the end. So then I trim off what's going to be sewn to the next block and what's going to be on the outside edge. So here we go. And it's just a little bit, you can see it's just the purple. Then I'll flip to the other side. In some cases I'll just do the side that needs to be sewn to the row. So this is going to be the side that's going to be sewn on here. So in some cases I'll just do that, especially if I'm in a hurry, and then I'll square the whole block when it's done. But I just use the lines inside my ruler on the seams, line it up the best I can, and then I scoot the ruler this way to the lowest part in the fabric, which looks to be right here on the green, or on the turquoise, which makes sense because the fabric was pushed in that direction. So no matter how hard we try, the sewing machine does push your fabric just slightly to one side. And see, it just cuts off just a little bit of white. I dropped some there, but that's good. And then I sew my rows together. So this is the same thing I do, like I said, for a quilt. I do the same thing for a block. And I'm going to sew those together. Okay, here is our block sewed. Whoops! That's alright. I'll go ahead and fix that in a minute. But here's our block sewn together, not pressed. I wanted to show how, even though I planned ahead, my seams did go in opposite directions on, which is probably why, because it was upside down. Anyway, so you can encourage the seam to go in a different direction. So what I did was lined it up just like we did for nesting. I nested it, and then I folded this one over and just went ahead and let it stay nested, but it does do a wrinkle here, and that might show on the front of your quilt. So you can also nest and then pull it back. So see, the corners are still meeting right where they were supposed to. Oh, here we go. The corners, there's a lot of fuzz there. Let me go ahead and trim that. The corners are meeting, the purple and the green are meeting right where they're supposed to, and then I just fold the green back so I can keep my stitch smooth, but I will have to take it out I believe that's the one that's upside down. Yes, it is. That's the one that's upside down. So don't do that. I'm gonna go ahead and press my rows and we'll take a look at the front and how the corners meet, and then I'll go ahead and fix that. Okay, so here is our finished block with the fixed point. And now our seam pressing plan really did come full circle. So here's the back, and you can see that our corners are nested really well. They line up nicely. Let's bring it up a little closer so you can see. Corners are lining up very nicely when nested. And I do press to the dark side as much as I can for these, especially because I have a white background. And I'm very happy with it. So to square a block when it's completely done, what you're doing again is just trimming off just that little bit that might have been pushed while you sewed. I find that flannel stretches more than anything. So, and sometimes cotton you don't even need to trim. So what I do is I pick a side that looks pretty straight to me, which looks like this looks pretty straight. I believe this is the one we trimmed, which is great. So I'm going to line that up on a random line, which in this case is 9. And then I'm going to use my ruler to line up on the seams again. So this one I'm lining up on 8, and again these are random lines, 12. And then I scoot my ruler to the edge of the fabric until I hit the lowest edge, which looks like it's up here. So I'm going to go ahead and trim. There we are. Just a tiny bit. Like I said, cotton, sometimes you don't even need to trim because it doesn't shift as much when you sew as compared to flannel. So this is, I know it's a straight line. This looked very straight to me. So I'm going to go ahead and line this up on a random line on my mat, which happens to be 8. I tend to move my blocks to the middle of my mat when I work like this, rather than the edge. It's just personal preference. So I'm lining up line here on the seam, lining up there on the seam. Gonna be a little bit off. Scoop my ruler out all the way to the lowest edge. Make sure it's still straight all the way through, and trim. In this case, it was just this tiny little bit of purple and white. Just slightly. Now, if you are an experienced quilter, an experienced sewer, you may not need these little trims. They will get tucked into the seam. But if you do notice that your block is looking very off, it is a really good idea to trim. So I'm lining it up here on the 12 and 8. Scoot my ruler, scoot back just a tiny bit to the edge of the fabric, and trim. And just a little bit of purple on that one. I'm going to keep this little dent right here because I know that's going to go ahead and fit into my 1/4 inch seam. So there we are. Oh, we got one more. So I know this one's a little bit off, so I'm going to go ahead and line up on this side on a random line, which looks to be, this one's 14 here. There we go. And the reason I like to line up on a straight line on the mat first is just to kind of give myself a reference point so I can triple check and make sure everything is lined up. Scoot, there we go, and it's just a very tiny bit down there on the end. There we are. We have a squared friendship star all ready for our Block of the Month quilt. So thank you all so much for joining me today and learning how to piece our friendship star. I hope that you have a wonderful day, and I cannot wait to see what you create. Remember, if you decide not to use this block in your quilt, there are many ways to use this beautiful block. A bag would be wonderful. A fun little pillow would be great. Let me know if you need any ideas, any support. You can always post in our Facebook group and ask suggestions. If you need help with color, also feel free to reach out to our Facebook group and post your color options, and we would love to help you pick your colors. So have a great day, and I cannot wait to see what you create. And then I'll go ahead and fix that.